KOWS 107.3 FM, Occidental, California. On the telephone from Santa Monica or Venice, California, one or the other, Dr. Arthur Janov. Good afternoon.
Hello, how are you?
I'm well, Dr. Janov. How are you doing?
I'm surviving. So far, so good for my age.
You're still with us.
Yeah, I'm still here.
Right. Well, we're more than fortunate to have you. I've had the great thrill, actually, of reading your brand new book over the last several days. It's called Life Before Birth: The Hidden Script That Rules Our Lives, by Arthur Janov, Ph.D. It's published by NTI Upstream in Chicago. It's edited by Jeff Link, and the cover and interior designer by Annie Heckman. Congratulations on this monumental book.
Thank you. I hope it's monumental.
You know it is.
Okay.
Don't you?
Hey, I succumb.
Dr. Janov is known to many as the originator, the discoverer, really, of primal therapy, primal theory. He's been working at it, with it, for several decades, maybe 30, 40 years now. 44 years. Right. It only seems like 100.
Can you imagine 44 years?
Yeah, it's
But the science has changed, and when I first started out, there was nobody who could understand it or agree, and especially the professionals. And now not all the current research, but a great deal of the current research is backing up everything I say. And, when we're talking about life and death, and I'm saying that this therapy is really a matter of life and death now, because what we're finding is that as there's well, first of all, I should probably start at the beginning and say that there's trauma in the womb, and we need to set back the clock so that we take account of trauma that occurs while a mother is carrying, that has lifelong consequences for how long we live, for example. So that there's a current research study that shows that as you get more traumatized in the womb now, your life expectancy is much shorter. And this has been done with telomere research, and also the research we did on cortisol, which is that the higher the cortisol level, that is, the more stress you're in chronically, the shorter your telomeres. And the shorter the telomeres are, the less long you're going to live. So when you get rid of the childhood pain that happens way back when, and there are ways to do it, you will live longer, much longer. So it's truly, a proper therapy now is a matter of life and death. And not only because your life expectancy is shorter when you have trauma, but you get sick earlier, and you have diabetes, Alzheimer's, all kinds of diseases on the way to your death, which makes life very uncomfortable.
Right. And you're miserable to be with.
Also. So we have to try our best not to be miserable, right?
Yeah. What's a telomere?
What is a telomere?
Yes, sir.
It's a cap that's on the chromosome. It's like a radiator cap on each end of the chromosome. And what happens is that as there's trauma, the tips of the chromosome unravel, so to speak, or become frazzled, and they shorten. And over time, they shorten more and more until you die. And the idea is to have longer and longer telomeres so you'll live longer. And there's a big movement now for those who are taking. You can take telomeres now. There's a doctor called Ed Park who's doing the research on it, and it seems to be very effective. But there's two ways to lengthen telomeres, in my opinion. One is to do what's called TA65, which is the telomere pill, which enhances telomeres, or you take the pain out of the system, which is what we do, and that also will lengthen, in my opinion, the telomeres and your life. Far more important than telomeres is your life.
Right.
But that's only a small part of, not a small part, but it's just part of what we do. The idea is that we found a way to take the pain out of the system going all the way back. And what we're finding is that pain begins way, way earlier than we thought. I used to think that the greatest point was the birth trauma. Well, that's no longer true. Way before the birth trauma, there are traumas from smoking mother, anxious mothers, depressed mothers, that have a lifelong effect on the baby, on the offspring.
What is the triune brain?
Well, the triune brain was first, I discovered it through my clinical work, but it was written about before I even knew about it by a guy named Paul MacLean, who became a friend of mine. And he's the granddaddy of modern neuroscience. And he discovered that we have like 3 brains in one. And we have a top-level thinking brain, we have a mid-level emotional brain, and a deep sensational brain, that is something that feels sensations down on the brainstem. So we had 3 brains in one, all working together, but all having independent lives. And what happens is, in trauma and neurosis, is some of those brains get suppressed. They get covered over by repression. And then what happens is we no longer feel, we no longer have our feelings to guide us, and we suffer.
You say that pain is unmet biological need. Do I read you correctly?
But what's happening is that we've got a new definition of need, because need means fulfilling biologic requirements. So enough oxygen, enough nutrients, all that kind of stuff, from way back while we're being carried, because the brain is rapidly developing, the whole organ system is developing, and trauma during that period can adversely affect all of that, especially brain development. So that later on you have ADD, you have learning problems when you have that kind of trauma early on. And, for example, there's a new research study that shows that when the mother has inadequate nutrients or stuffs herself or whatever it is while she's carrying, the baby learns that this is the kind of environment to expect and has a tendency after the age of 9 to become fat. And that all happened in the womb. And then we wonder, well, why is he so fat all the time? Well, there it is. They've discovered now that the mother's intake during pregnancy has everything to do with how fat we become later on. Right. So what we do really is go back to those days. We found a way to do it. It's going to be in this book called Life Before Birth, which is going to be out in about 3 weeks, by the way. And then we explain how that happens and how you can relive it. Mm-hmm. And what we've also found is that I talk about imprints, that is, the traumas that happen to us during womb life and at birth and thereafter in infancy are imprinted. And we found now there's a chemical reaction that it seals in that imprint called methylation. And what we need to do to reverse that imprint is demethylate, that is, change the methylation process so that the mark is no longer there, so to speak. So we have done that as well. Mm-hmm. So I guess the whole thing is multifaceted. You've got to consider neurology and neurochemistry and biology and all this. Yeah.
Well, it must be very satisfying to you personally to see the science catching up to what you were observing decades ago.
It is, and you know, now that some of the great researchers have read my manuscript, my book, and they have given me great recommendations, it shows that what they're doing is coinciding with what I've been doing for a long, long time. Mm-hmm. So you're right, it's very, very satisfying.
Right. Primal therapy, you say we go where history is engraved, that right. We're historical beings, that the imprints of our pain is rock solid, engraved into our cells, and that the imprint says, this is what happened to me, and this is who I am.
Am I writing that, or are you?
You are.
No kidding. Not bad. But anyway, it's true. You know, here we have a therapy that takes into account history from way, way back, because those things have affected our adult lives. And I still don't understand how psychotherapy can overlook all the things that happened to us that shaped our personalities, that shaped our diseases and so on, you know. We have to go back and address that history and try to undo it, which is, I think, what we have done. Mm-hmm. For example, we have lowered the stress level, the cortisol level, significantly after a year of therapy. Mm-hmm. And what we're finding is that the lower the cortisol, the longer the telomeres. That is to say, the longer you'll probably live, which makes sense. If you take the stress out of the system, you'll live longer. But that's the biologic, neurologic result, is that you have a longer telomere.
Right. So unmet biologic needs they're either felt fully or they're repressed.
Right, exactly. Or they're badly repressed, in which case you get hyperactive kids, kids who can't pay attention, who are jumpy or who are mentally ill. Mm-hmm. Because they can't contain the pain that's down there, because the trauma was so great early on that their whole repressive mechanism is weak and faulty.
Yeah. Well, to greater or lesser degrees, I think it's fair to say that we're all mentally ill.
Well, I don't know. I mean, the people I see are, because they come to me because of that. But they're not just mentally ill, they're emotionally ill. I mean, in other words, their emotions have just wreaked havoc with them. Mm-hmm. And the result is that they suffer. And, I mean, that's the point about psychotherapy, is that we see people who suffer, and we have to address the suffering, and we have to take that suffering out of the system. Mm-hmm. That's what we have to do if we're going to be good therapists.
Right. Well, you very effectively call out the entire profession. You say that almost the entire profession is built on engagement with the left brain, and that we're going to the wrong address. That where the action is, where the pain is, where the trauma and neurosis and the resolution is in the right brain.
Exactly, and the left brain, the wordy left brain, can be used to suppress feelings. In other words, some new studies just out on serotonin shows that the more we think and the more we philosophize, the better we can suppress our feelings. And that goes way again back to womb life, you know. There's a study in the Journal of Biological Psychiatry about serotonin and how the more we think and the more we cogitate, the less we can feel. Mm-hmm. We have to address the right brain. The left brain too often is used for suppression. So we have to circumvent that brain and address the right address. You know, I think I say in the book somewhere, you can't figure out what Cairo's about if you go to New York, you know. You have to go to the right address. Right. And for that, you need to understand a bit of neurology and psychology to know where the address is. Right. And that address turns out to be an old address that's been there for a very long time. All we have to do is go there. Mm-hmm. You know, it's been sitting on the same block for years and years. Yeah. We just keep knocking on the wrong door.
Dr. Janov, we barely know what a feeling is, don't we?
Yeah, but I mean, we have a pretty good idea these days what a feeling is. I mean,
you do, and that's what your work is all about, to restore our feeling capacity and to feel into our history, right. And to bring forth what has us tied in knots and miserable.
Well, I mean, the basic thing about feeling is that we have to have access to the feeling centers of the brain, that is down the limbic system, and also the brainstem. And what we try to do is open up that brain slowly and methodically so that the patient gains more and more access to her or his feelings. And that way we produce more feeling human beings, you know. Mm-hmm. But we don't rip it open. We don't use drugs and LSD or anything like that to open up the system, because that's dangerous. Right. But we do it slowly, and we give people access to their feelings finally so that they can get rid of their misery. Right. Because it's the feelings that are twisted and turned and repressed that are causing all the upset.
Right. I mean, aside from the enormous benefit to the afflicted, perhaps ultimately the real magnificence of this understanding is its implications for understanding pregnancy and motherhood much better than we do.
I think I'm hoping that the book will change birth practices as we know it, because we have a very good idea now what causes trauma in the womb. Very good idea. And by the way, most of my book is about that, about what happens to the mother and how that affects the offspring. That is, we have found that the mothers who are depressed while carrying most likely will give birth to a tendency to depression in the offspring. And the same goes for anxiety. And what's even more important is that if there's a great disruption, a great, I always want to say in French, a bagarre, but a dispute with the husband and the wife, chances are much greater that the offspring is going to spend a lot of time in emergency rooms with asthma, with allergy attacks, with all kinds of immune problems. And not only that, but I'm going to say something very controversial now, which is that when the mother and the father are fighting all the time, there's a much greater tendency for the child to be homosexual. Mm-hmm. That's just the research that's done by a guy named Daniels or something like that, and Dorner in Germany. Mm-hmm. And when the father leaves in the middle of the pregnancy, or there's a divorce, or he dies, or whatever, there's also a much greater tendency toward homosexuality in the offspring. Mm-hmm. In other words, the hormones are changing radically from the mother to the offspring. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So that there's,
in utero.
In utero, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole ball game now, in terms of current research by Michael Meany up in Canada, by Anand, who's just doing great stuff too, and all kinds of people are doing the research. And we're finding that's the time period we have to address. It's the most critical because that's when the brain is developing so fast, mm-hmm. and where things can go wrong with the brain.
Right.
Where thinking problems can have a lasting effect.
Right. You make a distinction between heredity and epigenetic heredity.
Well, what they are finding and what I'm finding also in the therapy is that there's a thing called epigenetics. And that simply means that the things that happen while you're carrying, while the mother is carrying, have, in my opinion now, a much greater impact on the development of the child than genetics itself. Because it's rerouting, redoing the genetic tendencies. In other words, through methylation, again, this I think a methyl group, what it does is it changes the evolution of the gene. It turns the gene off or on when it shouldn't be. So it turns the gene off when it should be on, and vice versa. So the epigenetics, those traumas that happen to the child, the mother smoking, for example, or drinking, or taking drugs, that's going to change the child's life forever.
Dr. Janov,
it's a pretty drastic thing, but I mean, luckily we found a way to reduce or reverse that. Mm-hmm. And demethylization is also one way it can happen.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Janov, the great majority of us are not going to have the time to come to Los Angeles to do the therapy.
Right.
I like to think that understanding and actually feeling into the intelligence here that is so, the more one exposes oneself to this understanding, the more clear it becomes and the more, in a sense, obvious.
Yeah, and you don't have to come to therapy, but what you have to do is be aware. For example, mothers who are carrying should not start a new business with all the stress. They just shouldn't. And that they have control of, right? Or if they're going to get divorced or whatever, they should hold off so that all the trauma around divorce can happen later after giving birth, In other words, there's things you control in your life. And stress from the mother, there ought to be a way that a mother can be very aware of what she's doing. For example, she should not take tranquilizers, not take painkillers, not drink, not even 1 or 2 drinks. You take 1 or 2 drinks and your baby gets drunk. You take drugs and the baby is highly suppressed in terms of its breathing apparatus, for example. So the things that mother can do, and also when she gives birth, try not to have massive anesthetics while giving birth, because that really affects the baby's breathing, digestion, thinking, all that business. So, I mean, there are things that we can all do. Yeah. And I think for fathers, too, they have to help the mother be in a calm environment and take away as much stress as they can from the mother. Right. Because she's building a new human being in this world, and that's the most important thing anybody can do.
Yeah. Is there any help for the common sufferer, the common neurotic, of which we are legion?
What do you mean by help?
Well, barring therapy, without having the time or the resources to undertake this magnificent therapy, what's left for us? How can we mitigate our own pain and suffering and our own unconsciousness?
Have you got some suggestions, Ken? Because I think you probably know as much as I do about that.
Well,
if you don't address those times, then all you can do is suppress the pain that's now, right? I mean, I don't know what else to say. Mm-hmm. I mean, those are the times when you were formed.
Yes.
And there's ways to address it and undo it. And I think it's monumental discovery, but they have to come. But my book is addressed to far more people than having therapy. It's addressed to being careful, being aware, being conscious, of all these things around birth.
Right. Well,
also, what?
No, I wanted to tell you personally that I may be fooling myself, but I feel that I have enjoyed some relief from my own personal suffering by understanding that the knee bone's connected to the ankle bone or whatever. That this is all a very lawful, that our humanity, that our lives, our emotional and physiological realities, regardless of how unfortunate they might have been, are still comprehensible, and in that comprehension there is some relief. Now, this is entirely left brain. I don't lay down and weep my heart out. I wish I could, and I wish I did. I don't have that kind of access. But again, I don't know if I'm fooling myself, but I feel some relief just from understanding.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the point of the book, isn't it? The point of the book is not to have the whole world come for therapy. The point of the book is to make people aware of what they can do about all this. And there's a lot they can do, a lot. Just being aware. And also, I'm pointing people in the directions of the causes of all their pain. So, they just have to pay attention and be careful, especially in terms of how they rear children.
Right. Right. Now,
are we at 20 minutes, Ken?
We are, Doctor.
Well, that's it.
Okay, I much appreciate...
I would do this often with you if you'd like, but I can't do... As you know, I'm going for a treatment for my throat because I
Absolutely.
can't
No, we're very grateful for you to come talk to us at all, and I do want to do it as often as you'd make yourself available. And I want to invite...
I'll available often.
Well, good. Well, then we look forward to talking to you again.
Well, thanks a lot, and I'm sorry to cut short, but I mean, I have to.
Please send our highest regards to your wife.
Okay, well, I thank you again, Ken.
Okay, thank you, Doctor. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Dr. Arthur Janov in Santa Monica, California. I've been talking with Dr. Janov over the last week, especially. Dr. Janov is no longer a spring chicken, and he does have a health issue that keeps him from having the kind of stamina that he might otherwise enjoy. Anyway, we agreed that Dr. Janov would talk to us for a few minutes today. I'm going to take a short break, and I'm going to come back and spend the rest of the hour and read some of the material from this new book, Life Before Birth. As some of you know, I have the highest regard for this man and his life work. I think if we survive and go forward on this earth and have a future, I think he will be recognized as the giant of our time, as one of the great giants of our time. And I certainly encourage our listeners to study his work and understand. And all this science is emerging now in full support of all this theoretical groundwork that Dr. Janov's been laying down for decades. And like most pioneers and innovators and women and men who see deeply into the nature of things that have not previously been seen deeply into, he's taken his lumps as well. So it comes with the territory. Great admirer of Dr. Arthur Janov. Thanks for talking to us. I'll be back in a few minutes to talk further about the